Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the Seafloor Habitat session. Before we get started, I just want to thank Marco for putting together an amazing conference. It really is a privilege to be here to see some of this quality of talks from this great, some world-renowned scientists. And you can't beat the price, so it's always a good thing. My name is Rich Wong. I work for Delaware Fish and Wildlife. I manage our marine finfish and shellfish programs. I've been involved in fisheries management for a long time, 20 plus years, and I've spent most of my time involved in population dynamics, studying how populations change over time, how and why they change over time. And so we put these, and we try to understand organismal biology, growth, reproduction, and mortality, and then we monitor populations, and we monitor landings. We put the biology and the monitoring together, and then we model populations. So somehow we credibly model the population. But one of the things all these models, really, they have a huge assumption that the habitat, is functioning, it's there, it's functioning, and it doesn't really change over time. And when the habitat is changing, that really throws a wrench in the works. Now that being said, this is a session about habitat, so I'm really, really excited to hear three excellent talks, pretty wide-ranging topics. So we can just jump right into it. The first talk is by Ben Marcelli. He's a doctoral candidate here at University of Delaware. I won't read the title. I think you can do that. It's about sharks and habitat use in dredged areas.
Thanks, Rich. So, I'm Ben Marcelli, PhD student here at the University of Delaware, working on different aspects of highly migratory shark ecology. And today I'm going to present a research project that we are doing on studying highly migratory sharks on a coastal dredge shoal. So the idea here is more to present the project, give you an overview of the method that we use and how it's relevant for management, much more than digging into the ecology side of things. And so, first of all, I want to thank all my co-authors as well as BOEM for supporting and funding the research. So, globally, ocean energy and resources is really a thing about oil and gas and offshore winds, and we heard a lot of that about that in the previous session about how sand is important. So that's not only the only resource out there. There's also marine minerals, and so because people touch base on that, I'm gonna skip it right to the next slide. So this is managed by BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, of which we have many representatives here, that signed 69 leases since 1995, representing the extraction of 200 million cubic yards of sand and the restoration of 485 miles of coastline. So this is a pretty intense industrial effort, and it requires also an important research effort in terms of environmental research. This for assessing the effect of sand exploration and extraction, also to design effective mitigation measures to minimize the environmental effects that sand extraction can have. So we are working on Sandwich Shoal in Virginia, as it's been introduced by Victoria earlier. So Sandwich Shoal is located in federal waters. It's a shallow shoal that is starting to be dredged in 1996. There's been 8 different dredging projects since, representing the extraction of 11 million cubic yards of sand, and this is only designed for beach replenishment of a really local beach. And it has been characterized as an essential fish habitat by NOAA for a bunch of species, including highly migratory sharks. So, highly migratory sharks in the Mid-Atlantic Bight, you have here 6 examples of species that we commonly find in the Mid-Atlantic Bight, species of different size and different characteristics. And one of the common things that they share is that they show extensive seasonal migration along the coast, and basically they're moving northward in the spring and summer, where they stay there, and then when the water cools down, they're going to migrate back south, and then they redo these migration cycles every year. So the question now is, when are these species, if they actually are, when are the species using sandwich shoal? And ultimately, can we minimize the potential effects that dredging can have on these species? So the first method that we use is standardized long line survey, so it's basically fishing. What we do is that we deploy 3 long lines aligned to each other. So the 2 first long lines have a big line with 25 big hooks on it that are baited with mackerel. And then you have a third line with 50 smaller hooks. We diversify the size of the hooks to, of course, diversify the size of the catch and the different species. And we do that every month. And the interesting part is that you use a standardized method. So basically, we let them soak for an hour, and we do all the time the same thing, which allows us to calculate very easily the catch per unit effort. So basically, the number of sharks that you're going to get for an hour of fishing. And this is a good proxy for relative abundance. So here you have 5 examples of the results of the CPUE for each month for 5 different shark species that we find on sandwich shoal. For example, on the far left, you have the example of the sandbar sharks. You can see that they are showing up a little bit in April, being really present in May, then they disappear until the fall when we see them again in October and November. And you have a bunch of other examples. For example, in the middle, you have the sharp-nosed shark that is very different, is hanging out there in the summer. So this method allows us to assess the presence of these different species at different times of the year. And globally, it's a pretty good start to describe the community composition. It allows us to quantify the seasonal variability in presence and the abundance of these different species, and also allow us to quantify eventual relationship with environmental variables, such as temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, and so on. So for sandwich shoal specifically, so this method allowed us to have a first idea of the pairs at which all the species are present and in which abundance they are present. And we made the hypothesis that this place was maybe not a focal area where the sharks are really hanging out, but more a transient area for highly migratory sharks that would be located on the migratory corridor and that they would just cross along their migration. So the drawbacks of that is that it represents a significant logistical effort. If you wanted to go fishing every month, several days a month, it's a lot of time, a lot of resources. You need people, you need boats, you need money. You have also a bias that might be introduced by gear selectivity. So, of course, you're going to see what you can catch. So, for example, we're also interested in the common thresher sharks, very cool sharks. We know it's there. We've seen them jumping around. However, they don't bite the hooks because they feed higher in the water column. So you're not going to get data on these guys just because of the selectivity of the gear. And also, you have a lack of spatial and temporal resolution that is just the results of the significant logistical cost. If you want to know what's happening in all the different parts of the shoal, every month of the year, you basically need to fish every year all the time. You just cannot do it realistically. So these are the little drawbacks and negative aspects of this technique. But it can be very good if you use complementary approaches. And the one that we use the most is passive acoustic telemetry. So for those of you who are not very familiar with this method, it's pretty simple. Basically, you deploy an acoustic transmitter, which is also called a tag. Basically, you're going to put in the sharks, you make a little incision, stick the tag in the body cavity, you make a nice knot, release the shark safely, and basically this tag is going to have a unique code that's going to help you identify the shark. And then concurrently, you deploy acoustic receivers that fix location, and basically when a tagged animal is going to swim by the acoustic receiver, the receiver is going to record the ID of the tag, and so therefore the animal, and the time and the date and the time of the detection, and so you'll know who is coming at which time. So we deploy 15 acoustic receivers that you can see on the map on the bottom right here that cover most of the shoal. And so after 2 years of data collection, because this is still ongoing, we collected 83,000 detection, which is not too bad, and that's represented by 968 different transmitters. So the other good part with this technique is that we all use the same equipment, which means that when I deploy a transmitter on a shark, and if the sharks go hang out by a receiver of someone else in another place, then it's going to be detected. And similarly, when somebody else tags an animal, and then it passes by sandwich shoal where I have receivers, then I will be able to detect the animal tagged by other people. And this allowed us to identify 581 tags among these ones. And so this is what we get. We have mostly Atlantic sturgeons, which is not a species that we are really targeting, but from a management perspective, knowing that you have a species listed on the Endangered Species Act coming, hanging out on the shoal is pretty good data. opportunistic but pretty good, and it's going to inform the other sturgeon project that is happening on Sandbridge Shoal. We get sand tiger sharks, sandbar sharks, some white sharks, and a bunch of other things. And this is really the results of one of the benefits of this method, is that you can collaborate and really amplify your sample size just by collaborating with other people. So it's a pretty good additional information on the community composition to supplement what we find with the long-line survey. So in terms of global detection, every month, and you have the temperature here in red, for example, you can see at first that there is two evident peaks of detection in the spring and in the fall that suggest that Sandbridge Shoal may be a transitory area during the migratory movement. So basically the shoal is right on the migratory corridor and the fish are just crossing the shoal while they are migrating up and down the coast. So these two periods of activity, detecting them is pretty interesting from a management perspective, and I'm going to touch base on that a little bit later. Now having 15 receivers located on the shoal is pretty good to look at the variability, the spatial variability of the use of these animals on the shoal. So for example, it allows you to know if there are locations of the shoal that are more used than others. And this is very important for management, because when you're going to design your next dredging project, maybe there are areas you want to prioritize to minimize the impact you could have on these species. So we see that the pattern is pretty uniform on the shoal, except at the peak season, especially in April, for example. You can see that the northeastern and the southwestern corners seems to be more used by species in general. So maybe that these areas are of primary interest for conservation and then therefore should be eventually avoided when you're going to design your next dredging project, for example. So this is pretty interesting for the management. Now if we look at the seasonal pattern of activity, you can see here on the left side, for example, the number of detection per month for the Atlantic sturgeon. In the middle, you have the sandbar shark, and on the right side, you have the sand tiger sharks. And the first thing that you can see is that it matches pretty well what we obtain with the long line data. However, we get kind of a better resolution, and it makes sense because the receivers are out there 24/7. They're collecting much more data, so we have a much finer resolution in terms of when these animals are coming on the shoal. The second thing, and this is about this seasonality I talked about earlier, is that we see these two peaks of detection in the spring and the fall, and therefore we can see these two periods of the year where there is not many animals hanging out. So again, when you're going to design your dredging project, eventually this is useful information to have if you want to try to minimize the impact that you will have on these species. And what we can do at the seasonal scale, you can also do it at the dial scale. Look at what time of the day are these animals showing up on the shoal. So on the left side, you can see the Atlantic sturgeon, for example, that seems to come pretty much all day long. They love the shoal at any time of the day. While on the other side, the sand tiger sharks, for example, you can see that they're mostly coming at night. So again, eventually that could be useful for management when you try to design how you're going to conduct your sand dredging extraction, the sand extraction of the shoal. So this is pretty good to identify higher and lower presence of highly migratory shark species. So this approach allows you to continuously collect data because the receivers are working while you are still at home. You can collaborate with other researchers, which allows you to amplify your sample size and basically all the results you're going to get. You can collect data on non-target species. So here the example of the sturgeon is very good because again it's a species of conservation interest. It's not a species that the research is focusing on, but we are very happy to collect this data, especially since there is an Atlantic sturgeon project starting on Sandbridge. So this can be very useful for management. And also it allows you to assess the spatial and temporal variability of activity at different scales. So about Sandbridge Shoal specifically, we identify high activity in the spring and the fall. That seems to be due to migratory movements. We identify areas and periods of higher presence of endangered highly migratory species, which can be useful for management. However, it requires maintenance. Of course, these receivers, you need to go find them, clean them, collect the data, change the batteries, etc., etc. So it requires some effort, but it's still significantly less than going fishing every month over and over again. The observations will be focused on tagged species. So if you're studying a species that a lot of people are studying, it's great. There is a lot of fish with tags swimming around. If you are starting a study on a new fish, then you need to do all the tagging yourself. And so it's going to require much more effort. And there's a relatively high cost of equipment. I say relatively here because compared to other tracking methods, it's fairly cheap. So especially considering the benefit you get from it. So it's a pretty good method. The last method I really wanted to briefly touch base is the baited remote touch base on. Baited remote underwater video systems, which are also called BRUVs. So it's a pretty easy systems. Basically, you have a frame with an arm, and at the end of the arm you put some bait. So here we put Atlantic mackerel, and on this frame you put a camera that's gonna just take video of the bait, and you're gonna afterwards look at the lab, see who is coming to check out your bait. And so this is a pretty good method to get a standardized and non-invasive way to assess the assemblage composition and the seasonal variation of presence of the different species. So this sounds awesome. We have some very good images of this cute spiny dogfish checking the camera out, or these spinner sharks. Although the video doesn't work, this is too bad. But there is a sharks coming and checking out the bait, so it's pretty cool and seems very promising. However, most of the time this is what we get, and and trust me, this is a pretty good one. Like sometimes it's just dark. So this is due to the turbid water. It makes total sense. Sandbridge Shoal is located just south of the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay, so we get all the water coming from the estuary. So we didn't have a much successful data collection with this method. So not very successful in Sandbridge, and I assume probably in different places in the mid-Atlantic Bight in general, but it could be still useful if you're working like far offshore. If you're working in Florida or somewhere else, that could be still a very good method. So a quick take-home message: standardized long-line survey and passive acoustic telemetry provide complementary insight on how the highly migratory shark species are using Sandbridge Shoal. We describe the assemblage composition and seasonality, and we identified areas and periods of high activity and therefore high vulnerability, most likely, and therefore periods and areas that potentially you could avoid when you want to plan your dredging project. The BRUVs are not very efficient on Sandbridge Shoal, but it's only specific to Sandbridge. Again, if you do that somewhere else with better water, it's going to be much better. And on top of that, we also collect tissue sample for stable isotope analysis, looking at diet and trophic ecology, and also deploy accelerometer tags to investigate really fine-scale movement of this animal on the shoal. So I didn't talk about that because we don't have much data on it yet, but if you have any question, please feel free to ask. And with that, I want to acknowledge all my lab mates, all the collaborators that generously shared the data and allowed me to identify all these fish swimming around, and also Bob Krischer, our personal commercial partner down in Virginia Beach, and of course Bohem for the supports and funding. And that, I will take any question when the time will come. Please feel free to contact me, and if I butchered anything with my accent, please feel free to ask clarification. I will be very happy to do it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Next up is Dr. Tom Grotus from Rutgers University. Let me grab this. The title of his talk is Shoreface Sand Ridge Structuring of Fish Habitat off New Jersey. Thanks.
Thank you, Rich. So I want to acknowledge my co-authors from the beginning here, including Dina Hansen from BOEM, and BOEM funded this. Also, Josh Kohut is here, my postdoc, Stephen Potts, and other collaborators, Doug Zemeckis and Caitlin Gannon. As well as the crew, we work with 2 commercial fishing vessel crews, and a whole army of technicians. So I want to introduce what a sand ridge, a shore-face sand ridge is here. It's a particular type of shoal. It's not completely unique to New Jersey, but that's really where we find them. So in the New York Bight, particularly, we have glacial sediments, and these are transported offshore at river mouths. And those eventually form ebb tide delta that during sea level rise, deglaciation, get flooded and left offshore and then reworked. So you have a different type of sediment and sedimentary environment south of Cape Henlopen, and also off of Long Island, New York. The rivers there tend to flow into the Long Island Sound. Essentially, the glacial moraines, which are Long Island, cut those off, and so you have a very similar habitat in terms of temperature, salinity, and other features throughout the inner to mid-continental shelf of the New York Bight up to Point Orient, but you definitely see more of these features, the sand ridge features, down off New Jersey, where that helps you form a basis for differentiating those as fish habitat apart from unridged habitat. So this is what they look like when they're forming. You see some of these before they have been swallowed by sea level rise. And this is what they're for, what they're being mined for, rather. We already heard about beach nourishment, so I'm going to skip over really the impetus for this study. I'm going to talk briefly about phase one of this work, which was literature and data synthesis. So looking right here at samples from 10 years of the National Marine Fisheries Service trawl survey, and these are essentially long trawls, 2 kilometers long or so, and using only trawls from the 3-mile federal state line down to the 50-meter isobath, we can look at the distribution of fish in those trawl samples and then go into the marine cadastre and pick out those trawls that were taken on sand shoals, or if they weren't taken on the sand shoal, were taken near a sand shoal, and that's based on using the bounding box of that sand shoal feature from the GIS layers that make them up. So they may have touched on the sand shoals themselves or passed over them, but are not centered on them. And what you see is this spread of samples. This is springtime only. You see a spread of samples based on similarity of the fish that were in that sample. If you look at where the samples were that were collected on sand shoals, you do see that they cluster together, meaning that there is some similarity in the samples that were taken on or near sand shoals, but you also see that there's quite a bit of samples that were taken off of sand shoals that look exactly like the samples that were taken on sand shoals. So there's essentially a gradient here. You can see what makes up that gradient on the left-hand plot, which is the canonical vectors that run through it. Most importantly, there is a moderate depth gradient to structuring this habitat, and this is bite-wide, so essentially from Cape May up to Orient Point, New York. And along with that depth, you see a salinity gradient. The first order is really temperature. Fish pay attention first to temperature, salinity, oceanography. That really defines their habitat. And then within that, there's secondary structuring. That's reflected also in a very similar type pattern when you take the fall survey only, again in the same area. A depth and bottom temperature gradient define most of that, but you do see some unique samples that typify shoals, at least near or on shoals, and you can also see what species typify those. In particular, the ones that you see here on shoals or near shoals are striped anchovy, southern kingfish, bullnose rays, weakfish, and some others, and I'll go back to the spring ones to identify them. So the ones that would typify shoals are especially, well, I can't even see those anymore. Yeah, northern sandlance, of course, with smallmouth flounder, winter flounder, clear-nosed skate, and menhaden. So interestingly, there are a number of pelagic fishes that correlate well with the sand shoal part of this gradient. And from work done by Ken Abel on juvenile fish using very small trawls, they also found structuring of very small juvenile fishes that were pelagic fishes. So this was intriguing to me. So, and just kind of wrapping up what was actually quite a long synthesis, this image basically demonstrates that, that at the first level of just having sediment varies in terms of its successional stage. So if you take it away or it gets deposited or it's been stable for a while, it has a different infaunal community in it. The composition of that matters, and it matters to the success, to the animals in it too. The relief potentially changes things because it drives currents. The context, if that's in Delaware, it may act different, or if it's in Florida, it may act very different than what it does near the apex of the New York Bight because of the temperature cycle that we have up there. So those things come together to determine the infaunal community. The relief determines circulation. Context adds to neighbors and scale, and that's the neighborhood of that sand deposit, and provides some idea about how that acts. And on the spatial scale, going from millimeters to 100 kilometers, and I see my label wrapped around there, that's millimeters to 100. What those things determine in the life cycle or in the ecology of the fish is everything from feeding, which happens on a millimeter scale, through the structural needs of fish habitat, such as refuge, on up through life history, and connectivity, for instance, connectivity with adjacent estuaries, which isolate fish from anything that happens on the shore, on the shore face sand ridge, if, for instance, their early life history is not there. So this phase 2, we're very interested in what specific life history mechanisms do fish interact with in sand. And some of this was covered in the synthesis as well, but going into the field here in 20 and 24, we wrapped this together: trawling, bathymetric mapping, side scan sonar, acoustic telemetry, and camera tows. Now, side scan sonar gives you bottom features, but it also gives you pictures of fish. So the idea is that we started an initial mapping in fall of 2022. We set up a Sentinel hydrophone array to track fish. We did an assemblage survey by net, then did telemetry from some fish that we caught in the net. Then we recovered the hydrophones, and we start this cycle over again. So we have 2 times spring and 2 times fall. The idea was to get this after it was dredged as well as before. They haven't dredged it. It hasn't been approved for dredging. If it does get dredged, we'll go back to get it again. In the meantime, we get a larger context picture of what's going on around there from the glider. So Rutgers is operating the gliders around there, and we also have the CODAR system, which gives currents again, and satellite imagery. So all those things go together. What you see here are blocks that were side scanned with Remus autonomous vehicle. Inside those side scan blocks, we have the and these are straddling that sand shoal, the target sand shoal. Inside those, we have commercial fishermen do very short 2-minute tows, and we scan the bottom so we know exactly what the commercial fisher is dragging. And again, they're very short, so they tend not to integrate the habitat that you'd get in a long survey tow, but to disintegrate that. And then the hydrophones are spaced in between those survey lanes. This is the AUV. It's propelled, so not a glider. That means it's not constrained to having to go up and down. Instead, it can follow the terrain and stay exactly 3 meters above the terrain to get good side scan pictures. So you see the 900 kilohertz side scan rails, as well as the CTD, dissolved oxygen, CDOM, chlorophyll A. It has a hydrophone for tracking fish, and it also has an ADCP, and the ADCP gives you 3-dimensional movement above and below it, also gives you bathymetry and also helps navigate. So this is an image of from the side scan that shows a number of things. One thing you see here is a school of cownose rays clustered together. You can see their tails, their wings. You can see their shadow off to the side. You also see a very tight bait ball of small fish. The reason that they're very tight and balled up is because they are being attacked by a group of striped bass there, 4 of them in formation. And you can see their shadows further down here, and that's the shadow of the bait ball. So that wasn't taken on the sand shoal itself, but I'm going to show you a number of images taken on the sand shoal to show a surprising array of, or variety of textures, surficial features in that, going from pitted mud to areas of suborbital waves with very distinctive facies changes. We have a number of these dark black, very low reflectivity spots. Don't know what that is. Try to take images with camera, but as you saw on the BRUV images, this area can be very turbid. If you go back later, these are very transitory. So we've done 12 of these surveys repeated at the same place over and over to construct a record of change on these. There's also, we found the shipwreck and its mast, and you can see the suborbital waves in the image over there, as small sand features. Here again, a number of, I think these are biogenic pits, including pits dug by skates and rays, with very abrupt facies change running through them. And more of these. These right here are not sand waves. I think these are rolled ropes of mussel. We see them when we're diving and they form a feature like that. But again, there's some mysteries here. We can classify these using machine learning algorithms, but they're unsupervised. And again, some final features, and this just shows the variety of different things that you can see on the bottom here. And then finally, of course, fish. So these are sand lance on the left, a school of sand lance in the water and in the water column, and then a school of menhaden on the right side. So we take this and mosaic the individual lines, and you can see, even though this is very pixelated compared to what it is up close, you can see features running through that. We can run that through a classifying algorithm, and scale matters here. We're doing 20 by 20 meter texels, and you can see largely that there's a texture change that corresponds with depth on this. We can also, this is the bathymetric map created from a single pass, but we now have since put these together from all 15 and gotten very detailed bathymetry. And then we can go in and extract the trawl path from that bathymetry, and we don't have just the mean depth of the trawl, but the actual variation and essentially the trawl neighborhood, the neighborhood of the fish that were caught in the trawl. And we can make those associations with a number of different features on the trawl caught assemblage. So what you see here is trying to do a similar thing with the bait fish that were up in the water column. So we take those and we can contour them using a smoothing algorithm, essentially a probability density function. Look at the salinity and temperature fields of this. This is only a single PSU spread there. No, 2. And temperature even less. And then finally, so the trawl pulls up the fish. We count those, and what we get is some structuring. So on the shoal side of the fish in spring, we tend to get weak fish and spot. Ridge front, we tend to get clear nose skate and butterfish. On the shoal slope, we tend to get smooth dogfish. In fall, we get Atlantic sturgeon on the shoal side, spiny dogfish, little skate, and winter skate from the ridge front all the way down. I see I'm out of time. We can then calculate richness and some other metrics from that. So the last thing I have to say is that none of the fish that we tagged stick around. You can see these are very short time periods. Skate had the longest time period, but even then it was days. Here's 9 different Atlantic sturgeon. So this was common to both fish that we tagged on site and released, which might be stressed. But then we look at everybody else's fish that come through, and they have the same pattern. They're there for a day or two, and they split. So takeaways. Ridge surficial habitat is naturally dynamic, much more so than we thought. The ridges do appear to structure fish habitat, including for Atlantic sturgeon, which are important. Fish use the entire New York Bight seasonally, so it looks like these fish come in, they spread through the whole bight, they migrate back out again. They're never any place long, but they're using this as a habitat mosaic, which means that if you destroy or change a particular sand shoal, it's probably not really detrimental because they're not using it for long and they're moving. However, they're going to expect cumulative effects because they seem to be moving, you know, the way that maybe zebra move on the plains. They just mow and then come back later and do it again. And so, yeah, I'll leave it here with a couple of other notes and don't want to get into your time.
Thank you, Mats. All right, the last presentation is by Nicolene McLean, Dr. McLean, and the title is Regional Wildlife Science Collaborative Habitat and Ecosystem Regional Seafloor Activities. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicolene McLean, and I'm the coordinator of the Habitat and Ecosystem Subcommittee of the Regional Wildlife Science Collaborative for Offshore Wind. And we are really grateful to Marco to have this opportunity to share a bit more information about RWSC's regional seafloor activities within the Habitat and Ecosystem Subcommittee. So to begin, I'll share a bit of information about RWSC. And so once again, RWSC stands for the Regional Wildlife Science Collaborative for Offshore Wind, so a bit of a mouthful. And RWSC was developed fairly recently, so back in 2021, to help facilitate collaboration among different entities that were collecting wildlife and habitat data to inform offshore wind development in U.S. Atlantic waters. And so these entities included federal agencies such as NOAA and BOEM, state agencies ranging from Maine all the way down to Florida, NGOs, offshore wind companies, and research institutions all came together and formulated RWSC to serve as a forum for collaborative offshore wind research. And so within RWSC, we really focus on collaboration. We've been hearing that word collaboration a lot today. That's because it's really, really important. And so we emphasize data sharing. We want RWSC to be a hub to promote collaboration among different stakeholders. We want to make sure that data sharing is a priority and data transparency as well. And so I'm sure that everyone in the room understands that in order for us to sustainably develop offshore wind in a manner that is not detrimental to the wildlife and ecosystems upon which they depend, we need a lot of data to inform decisions. And so within RWSC, the steering committee convened 5 working groups, 5 subcommittees at the time, comprising of experts from each of these different entities, and they all conducted a comparative or a comprehensive analysis of the state of the science related to specific taxa. And so at the time, there were 5 subcommittees. They were the Marine Mammal Subcommittee, Birds and Bats, the Protected Fish Subcommittee, Habitat and Ecosystem, and Sea Turtles. And so since the inception of RWSC, after those 5 subcommittees were formed, we have since formulated 2 additional subcommittees as a result of need. And so now we have the Data Governance Subcommittee, and we also have the Technology Subcommittee. But taking a few steps back, each of those subcommittees, as I mentioned before, conducted a comprehensive analysis of the state of the science related to a specific taxa, and they also provided recommendations for researchers to bridge some of the gaps that existed within those taxa. And so each of those subcommittees put together a chapter, and all of these chapters were combined to formulate the RWSC science plan. So within RWSC, as I mentioned before, we now have 7 subcommittees, and I help to coordinate the activities within the Habitat and Ecosystem Subcommittee. And since the science plan was successfully published earlier this year, RWSC has shifted its focus from science plan development to the implementation of the actions that were highlighted as priorities during the science plan development process. And so in order to help advance the implementation of some of these actions, we came up with subcommittee work plans. And these work plans were developed to help us within RWSC continue to update and maintain information about ongoing and planned research activities in the Offshore Wind and Wildlife Research Database. And this database is linked to the rwsc.org website, and so it is freely and openly available to folks who are conducting research in the region that can be used to inform offshore wind. We also use these work plans to contribute to the development of a research planning map by compiling information on where research is being conducted and what types of data are being collected and where assets are being deployed in the region. And finally, these work plans help us implement some of the recommendations that were highlighted as priorities during the science plan review process. And so in the RWSC science plan, the Habitat and Ecosystem Subcommittee, they created 2 chapters. And so there was a chapter that was dedicated to the seafloor, and then there was another one that was dedicated to oceanography. But I'm going to be speaking a bit more about our seafloor-related activities this afternoon. So the seafloor chapter was developed to build on research topics and questions related to seafloor habitat and offshore wind. And there were a number of recommendations to improve seafloor data collection, analysis, and management. And so in addition to a number of the recommendations that were provided, there was very high priority placed on 2 topics. And so the first of these topics was developing a best practices document for mapping deep sea coral and sensitive hard bottom habitat, so within the RWSC study area. And so again, we are interested in all activities that are being conducted in U.S. Atlantic waters, and so that extends from Maine all the way down to Florida. And so we find incredible value in being at this conference here today. And the second objective is the second topic is to develop a consistent Atlantic coastwide seafloor habitat map with metrics of interest to RWSC. Now, we do understand that this will be quite an undertaking, and right now in RWSC, we are putting together the scope of work that will be required to make a project of this caliber even possible in the future. And we hope to work with as many folks as possible in the room to help advance this effort. And so to help advance these 2 topics, RWSC is working on developing the seafloor data repository. And this repository will serve as a hub, actually an actual repository for stakeholders in the region who are collecting seafloor-related data. And so this was identified as a high priority need just in general, as there are a number of stakeholders who are collecting data and are open to sharing that data, but there is just not a centralized repository that through which all of this data can be accessed and shared very broadly. And so after identifying this need, a pilot repository was developed with funding from NROC, developed by NROC with funding from BOEM, Mass CEC, so that's the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, and the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management. And so they provided funding for us to come up with a pilot data repository, and we were able to demonstrate proof of concept and have a successful demo last year. And as a result of this growing need, we were fortunate enough to receive funding from Marco, and NROC to transition from a pilot to a fully functional data repository. And so RWSC, our Habitat and Ecosystem Subcommittee, will oversee the development and use of this data repository. And we really think that this product, or this repository, can be used to support regional mapping efforts. And so as we transition from a pilot to a fully functional repository, we are going to work on, adding a number of features. And so we're currently working on connecting the repository to a secure cloud-based database for data storage, and we're also looking at adding a number of tags and flags to limit accessibility and to improve the experience of stakeholders who want to upload data and also download data for their own applications. And so, as I mentioned before, having a centralized repository will be really useful as we move forward with advancing some of these, advancing the Seafloor topics that were identified as priorities. And so the objective of the first topic is to conduct a comprehensive review of methodologies that can be used to develop regional scale maps of hard bottom and deep sea corals and identify best practices to encourage consistent approaches. And so in the work plans associated with each of these topics, there were a number of actions that were proposed to members of the subcommittee. And so a few of the proposed actions included reviewing methodologies that can be used to develop regional scale maps of hard bottom and deep sea coral habitat, and also developing or determining the metrics of importance in constructing these regional maps of sensitive hard bottom. So one thing I should mention is that within RWSC, during the science plan review process, this was identified as a need within the Gulf of Maine as a result of the near almost absence of high-resolution seafloor data in areas that will likely be developed or used for offshore wind development in that region. And so we have decided to start with the Gulf of Maine and then potentially use it as a case study for further expansion southward. And so there was a working group that was formulated to help advance these activities. And in this working group, we really welcomed regional experts who were collecting seafloor data to, one, help us understand where the gaps are in the Gulf of Maine. And so we invited Dr. Jesse Miner from the Maine Coastal Mapping Initiative, which is within the Maine Department of Marine Resources, to provide a presentation on the bathymetric footprint that currently exists in the Gulf of Maine. And we also found immense value in Dr. Jesse Miner's presentation, where he mentioned the Maine 2024 offshore mapping priorities. And so this highlights Maine's attempt, or their intent, to map 840 square nautical miles from shore in Maine all the way out to the Boehm wind energy area. And so they really are interested in having 4-meter continuous bathymetry and backscatter from shore to the wind energy area. And so they really want to map areas that will be potential cable routes from the main research array in addition to these wind energy areas. One thing I'd like to add is that in this meeting we also heard from Matt Pody, who is a member of the working group, who shared NOAA NCOS's plans for mapping and collecting bathymetric and ship-based, or carrying out ship-based surveys in the Gulf of Maine, as well as their sail drone data collection within the Gulf of Maine too. And so just based on that working group discussion, we were able to gather data that can be used to help inform mapping deep sea coral in the Gulf of Maine. And so the next steps within that working group, we're really going to be focusing on identifying the resolution thresholds that should be put in place for deep sea coral delineation in the Gulf of Maine. We really want to understand the best methods for analyzing data that are collected at different resolution, and we have listed this as a very high priority within the Habitat and Ecosystem subcommittee because we want developers to have the best available information for collecting and analyzing data so that there aren't any ecological conflicts within the area. And we are working with members of the working group, and for the rest of 2024, this is going to be a very high priority. The second objective is to create a roadmap for the future development of an Atlantic coast-wide seafloor habitat map equipped with metrics of interest to RWSC. And there were a number of actions that were proposed, including identifying existing and available data sets that can contribute to building a regional map, including those collected by offshore wind projects. We are also working on developing a list of seafloor habitat metrics that can be mapped consistently across the RWSC study area. And this seafloor data repository is going to be really useful as we attempt to put together these large regional scale maps of habitat. And so within this working group, given that we're interested in putting together a regional scale map from Maine all the way down to Florida, we invited Mark Finkbeiner from NOAA's Office for Coastal Management to provide a presentation on the Seascapes 2 project, which is a seafloor geomorphology map that produces a number of outputs and products that can be used to develop regional that can be used to inform regional decision making. And so this is some of the products include bathymetry, hillshade images, CMEX geoforms, interpreted layers, bathymetric confidence layers, and the list goes on. And so within the working group, we are interested in using a similar method to develop the regional scale map within RWSC, and we are working to determine what the spatial extent of this mapping product should be and identify depth thresholds and other characteristics. And so moving forward for this working group topic, we're gonna continue the development of that seafloor data repository, because that will be key in making this possible. And we're also creating a list of metrics that are going to be important and reviewing methodologies that have been employed to map seafloor in other regions of the US. And so including the Great Lakes and the southeastern coast of the US. And so I will close by saying that RWSC, again, is really grateful for the opportunity to speak at a forum of this caliber where we see the opportunity for us to engage with stakeholders who are collecting a lot of data that can be used for a number of different applications. And we encourage folks to attend subcommittee meetings. They are open and welcome to anyone from the public. And so again, thank you all so much for the opportunity, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to respond.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. McLean. And to summarize this, I think what we're continue to see is that every inch of the seafloor is utilized by marine life, particularly important fishery species, as Ben and Dr. Grotu showed, and as Dr. McLean showed in her talk. It's critically important to continue to map and survey and study these bottom habitats and make the data freely available to all our stakeholders. So I think we have a couple minutes, 1 or 2 minutes for questions, if anyone, the audience.
Yeah,
Doctor, go ahead.
I have a quick question for Ben. Was there any measurements, or is there opportunity to get oceanographic sensors on the acoustic array that you presented to see if there's variability across that scale and if that could help interpret the tag results of fish showing up in certain parts of the array?
Yes, so that's, can you hear me? Yeah. In terms of horizontal spatial dimensions, not that much. We set up a line of sensors in the middle of the array to get an idea of the stratification. So we have temperature, connectivity, dissolved oxygen, light sensors, even if they get biofouling gets everywhere. In terms of different areas of the shoal, not that much, unfortunately. We'll get a little bit of data because some of the tags also measure temperature, so we get a little bit of it, but it's something I didn't look into yet, and when I will probably use model data more than actually measurements. If that makes sense.
Hey, thanks for 3 great presentations. This is probably a question for Nicolene. Maybe quickly prefaced by an observation, which is that for about several decades, a lot of decisions in the Mid-Atlantic pertaining to the Mid-Atlantic shelf were made using the best available data, which was really terrible. The data which said that the Mid-Atlantic was just a featureless sand flat with some really cool sand waves and shoals and things. And we've learned more since then, but there's still a lot of information, a lot of knowledge held by fishing communities, recreational, commercial, for hire, about the location of structure on the shelf of the Mid-Atlantic. And I'm hoping that this repository might even offer an avenue for some of that data, which is in people's chart plotters and in old handbooks, which is a term of art for information about handbooks are passed down from captains through families and friends about where not to fish because you'll screw up your net, kind of thing. And it would be great to see some of that data assimilated. And it would be really wonderful to see the investment in a large-scale mapping project like is very exciting in the Gulf of Maine. This type of information is really good for finding a habitat type that is very common in the Gulf of Maine and is very rare in the Mid-Atlantic. So that's my little pitch, I guess, and a question and a pitch for really upping our game for mapping where the sensitive habitats are on the Mid-Atlantic shelf.
Yes, thank you. That's a really great question. So RWSC, unfortunately, or fortunately, for the sake of ensuring that the data that we collect is related to those 5 taxa-based subcommittees, RWSC actually works really closely with ROSA to collect data. So that's the Responsible Offshore Science Alliance. And so they collect a lot of data that have commercial fisheries applications, and we have had conversations where there's a lot of interest in how there's an overlap between fisheries habitat and the data that is being collected to reflect that. And so right now, ROSA has a database known as the Fish Forward database, and so they're collecting a lot of habitat data that is related to that has applications for commercial fisheries. And so within RWSC, we won't include that information within this data repository, but what we will do is include links to ROSA's Fish Forward database so that all of that information is available to interested parties.
Okay, I've been informed we have time for one more question, if anyone has it. Okay, and then we'll wrap up this excellent session. Thank you.
Hi, I have a question for Dr. McLean. Hi, I'm Gwen, and I'm with Tetra Tech, and I was wondering if RWSE has plans to create some kind of data collection and formatting recommendations so data contributors can standardize their data to be easily assimilated into like a wide-scale mapping project like you described.
Yes, that's a great question. So we actually created an entire working group not a working group, an entire subcommittee to deal with data standards so that all folks who are interested in uploading information have all of the information that they need to make sure that their data meets metadata standards and there's other information that's made available to these folks so that it is packaged in a manner that is the most useful, and there can be a number of different applications just based on your interest. And there's an intent to make sure that all of this information is made available to interested parties.
Thank you. That's great news because having that information up front when we write contracts for subcontractors, we can write that in a scope of works, and then the data will be formatted that way and write things into data transfer protocols and things. So
yeah, that's really useful. Thank you for mentioning that.
Okay, thank you. That concludes the Seafloor Habitat session, and we're going to reconvene at 3:35 for a stakeholder panel session.